as a country. A moment of war, effectively. Not in the conventional sense, but a covert war that is everlasting and ongoing on the bodies of women and children. Over the last couple of days, over the last 2 weeks, we've been celebrating, or at least commemorating, 16 days of activism against violence against women and children. But the reality is, we don't really have the conversations. We say we do, but we don't really. More importantly, we don't have the tough conversations about what it looks like when women are being violated, when children are being violated. Who's doing it? Why are they doing it? What do we do with those who are the perpetrators thereof? What should we be doing with them? There's a lot to be spoken about around what's wrong with police, correctional services, what's wrong with the justice system. The slow, cranking, prevaricating nature of the justice system when it comes to gender-based violence is of great concern. There's a lot to be spoken about how do we conscientize men, particularly young men and boy children, about not being perpetrators of violence. And it's exactly that conversation that I want us to have today. And I want you, as you're listening to this, to be a part of it. Give me a call. The number to dial is 086 000 2032. I'll repeat that. It's 086 000 2032. You can also send a WhatsApp voice note on 0614 104 107. That's 0614 104 107. If you'd like to watch the show, please do so. We're streaming live on all our digital platforms. That is SAfm across Twitter, across Facebook, as well as YouTube. You can also tweet me at Oliver_speaking. My guests on today's episode are the following people. Sihle Sibisi, who's a gender-based violence activist and the founder of Kwanele Foundation. I'm also joined by Miriam Mangera, who's the national coordinator for the National Shelter Movement. And we'll also be speaking to Miles Buru, who is a organizer for human rights for prisoners, and particularly those who are still in correctional facilities. It's important that we have all three of those facets of the conversation, because we need to provide protection for women. We need to mitigate the potential of violence against women. And we also need to talk about how do we deal with those who have committed grave acts of inhumanity and violence on the bodies of women and children. Every other day we hear headlines of children having been raped, young children, months old. We hear headlines of women having been gang raped, women being beaten up. The reality is we all know somebody who perhaps continues to suffer under gender-based violence. As you're listening to this, somebody's name comes to mind. I'm almost certain that every single South African knows at least one person that has been raped. But somehow, we don't all know rapists. That's very peculiar to me. And that's an important part of the conversation as well. Again, you can be a part of it. The number to dial is 086 000 2032. I'm going to take a quick break. On the other side of this, we start the conversation.
SAfm has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Under the code, we are committed to giving news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that is not harmful, does not amount to hate speech, or contain violence or explicit sex. If you think we are not living up to that code, then you can inform the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Direct any complaints in writing to the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. PO Box 142365. Craig Hall 2024. Fax to 011-326-3198 or an email to bccsa@nabsa.co.za. For more information, please visit www.bccsa.co.za.
For unskippable, no clickbaiting, and cookie-free, with lots of real followers and likes, place your sales campaign on SAfm. Radio is still the best place to advertise your business at affordable rates. SAfm, with its national footprint and top personalities, offer advertisers distinctive opportunities to reach their target audience. Email sales@safm.co.za. SAfm, the influencer you can trust.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAfm 105.2 FM in East London. This week, today on SAfm.
17 minutes after 6 o'clock, you're listening to This Week Today. My name is Oliver Dickson. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being a part of the conversation as we lead the conversation all the way up until 7 o'clock. It's an honor and a pleasure to be in your company. Miriam, I want to start the conversation with you. And again, also thank you so much to you for being a part of this conversation. Oftentimes, we speak about how to mitigate gender-based violence. We often speak about how to make sure that women are able to report gender-based violence so that it can be adequately investigated and so action can be taken. We also speak about conscientizing men who are, by and large, the perpetrators of gender-based violence against women. But what we don't speak about, and what the picture we don't often paint enough as far as the public discourse is concerned, is painting the picture of just really how vulnerable women truly are during, before, and after the act and fact of experiencing gender-based violence. Can you speak to us about just the vulnerability in that moment? And I ask that because I'm hoping it will appeal to the humanity in all of us, that it will turn us into compassionate engagers and interlocutors into this conversation if we think of women as people, as human beings whose bodies are continuously violed. And if we can vividly imagine that vulnerability, hopefully it invites a lot more compassion. And that's why I'm asking you, perhaps to sketch out what that vulnerability around that moment, before the moment, and after the moment, and also taking into cognizance, is often not a singular moment, it's continuous acts of violence that women who are victims of gender-based violence experience. Can you sketch out that vulnerability for us?
Good evening, Oliver. Thank you for having me on the show. You have put together a very concise overview of the situation, and you're very right. When a woman is in that situation, and generally when she looks for help, it's not the first time that she's experienced violence. And out of the stats for the second quarter of 2022 financial year that SAPS released last week, we were told that 95% of the violence against women stats were from intimate partners, persons that these women live with. So when a woman reaches out for help, it's more than likely that it's not the first time that it's happened, and it's generally when it has come to a point where she cannot deal with it herself anymore and she's desperate for assistance. The woman is reaching out, generally according to the United Nations stats from 2017, says that a woman would look for help 7 times before she actually leaves her perpetrator on the 8th time. So we're dealing with the most vulnerable in our communities, and most of the time it's our neighbors, it's our sisters, it's our friends, and we are the ones that are overlooking what is happening right in our own communities.
Yeah. Sitla, do you maybe want to speak to that as well? And I would want to pad on to that and just say, why is it that when women are seeking help, that the help is not extended to them? Like when I started the show, I say every single one of us listening, participating in this conversation, we all know somebody that is a victim of gender-based violence. We all know somebody that has been raped. Yet we don't all seem to know rapists, interestingly. But why is it that when women reach out for help, that they often don't receive that help? Is it that we as a society have become desensitized to the conversation, to the act, that it's so common cause and so everyday that it's to be expected, and if I see it, I'm just going to go on with my life? It doesn't call for a moment for me to pause.
No, I think, good evening to you, Oliver.
Just a second. Let's see if we can get your mic close to your mouth and have that mic
Is it
on.
closer?
There we go.
Yes,
Perfect.
sorry. Good evening to you, Oliver, and our listeners. I think the problem is that why women are not believed when they report issues of gender-based violence and femicide and rape is because most of the time you find that your rapist, your perpetrator, is an immediate family member, somebody that you know within your surroundings. And what we found is that most of these people, when you look at them on the outside, it's someone that you would never imagine would do such a thing to someone. So when they're outside with people, they behave in a certain manner where people, for example, let's use a pastor, for example. People would think, I know you're lying. It cannot be Umfundisi that is doing this. Not the pastor that is laying hands on us. Not the pastor that is praying and declaring blessings on us. You are lying. So you find also what also amplifies the fact that most GBVF victims don't get the assistance is that sometimes women around that GBVF victim are enablers, because sometimes you find that they will not want the victim to amplify her voice because maybe her possible perpetrator is someone they know, someone they trust, someone that they do not want to tarnish their image. So you find that most of the time it's the women that bear the brunt of it. Women do report. Women do go to police stations. At the same time also, the very women that do report cases of GBVF and rape and abuse, you find that at the end of the day, if it's happening between them and their lovers and their partners, they go back and they withdraw the cases, because afterwards the partner will manipulate them, or they'll have conversations where they say, but we love each other. I mean, we can make things work. Forgive me. Let's move on. And then the very woman who's the victim, who is affected physically, psychologically, emotionally, it's called a Stockholm syndrome. A Stockholm syndrome is usually regarded with the fact that you end up falling in love with your abuser. You fall in love with the one person that inflicts the most pain on you. Yeah. So the thought of walking away, you cannot. So you end up thinking that, yes, he's done me wrong. Yes, she's done me wrong. But it's better the devil I know than the one I don't know. So cases are being reported, but women withdraw them or men withdraw them, because remember, GBVF, it happens to both men and women. You find that even when it does happen and I talk about it, the people around me will say I'm lying. The people around me won't want to believe it, because maybe the man that is my perpetrator is a man with financial muscle. He's a man in a suit. He's a man with political connection. Or he's a man that's at a level that's higher than mine. Or even if we're at the same level, we live under the syndrome of what will people say syndrome. So when families want to say, Begazela, come together, let's talk and work things out, these are some of the factors that make it a problem for people to think that cases are not being reported when they are, because people withdraw them. Yeah.
You know, when you said oftentimes it's, especially when it's powerful men, it's even women who come out in defense of those men.
Yeah.
And immediately when you said that, the image that sprung to my mind, I was young when this happened, but I'll never forget the image across the television screens of the ANC Women's League protesting outside the court in defense of Jacob Zuma in the Kwezi matter. Right? It's that level of defense often that men experience. But what it tells me is that society is willing to protect and defend men as far as they possibly can.
Look, society,
how do we change that?
How do we change it? We need to unlearn the rot. Because remember, as Africans, we grew up in a society where women are groomed and taught that you need to keep quiet about the ill treatments, be it psychologically, physically, that you experience within your marital home, within your home. As a result, as a mother, when you are in that home, your kids, it filters on to say the things that happen in our home, we don't talk about them, we keep them in our homes. So that is why we now are the generation that is amplifying our voices and saying we need to unlearn that. Never should we turn a blind eye to abuse that is happening. Never, because someone is in a powerful position, we must now want to defend that person at the expense of a woman. I'll give an example. I mean, I myself, I was abused. I was raped by a very powerful man. A powerful man who wears suits. He's got political connection, financial muscles. But guess what? Such men use their influences. Men in suits turn around and want to play victim. Why do I say that? Because this man who did me so bad in my youth then turns around, runs to the media, crying foul, saying, Sihle Sibisi wants to extort me because she alleges I raped her. But when you look at the facts behind it, not once did Sihle Sibisi say, I want money from you. Sihle Sibisi was holding him accountable to say, I need you to acknowledge, I need you to accept, and I need you to apologize to me for what you've done. So you find that not many women out there are as bold or as brave as Sihle Sibisi. So you find women will meet a type of kind of man like this who will threaten them on the sides, want to use media as a weapon to silence them, and these women decide, no, I'm turning a blind eye, I'm not going to talk about this, and I'm going to walk away. So it all goes back to educating the mind, unlearning the rot that we grew up thinking it was okay for us to do when we were kids, because we saw it happen to our parents and we thought it's a way of life. We need to unlearn it, and we need to call each other out.
Yeah. Miriam, Sihle speaks of something very important. Oftentimes when a woman has all the intention of opening a case against her perpetrator and going through that insanely laborious and litigious process of holding this person accountable, they often think about the potential of, this is my husband who's a breadwinner. What will the kids eat? What will I do with the kids? And who will protect me in the process? And they often succumb to those vulnerabilities and go back and continuously experience that level of violence. As a society, clearly there must be something we can do for women who are stuck in marriages where they have no options outside of the marriage itself. And by options, I mean financial viability, for instance. Where does the solution around that come in?
An excellent question. So if we look at what you've just raised, it comes down to economic empowerment and being able to sustain a family. And when we look at 51% of our population being women, but only 10% of them earning an income, that's a problem. It means that the women of this country are dependent on their spouses, their partners, their perpetrators. So we need to actually implement Pillar 5 of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence, which talks to economic empowerment. Women need to be trained, women need to be empowered, and we need to find economic opportunities for them so that they do not rely on their perpetrators. Shelters play a very vital role in a woman leaving a perpetrator when they have nowhere to go. Unfortunately, we are only funded partially by the Department of Social Development, which means that the remainder of our funding has to be fundraised, which means that programs like skills development, economic empowerment, accredited courses can only occur when we have donor funding. And donor funding is generally programmatic. So it means that if a donor gives you funding towards a program of advocacy, you cannot use that money towards economic empowerment. And shelters only are allowed to keep women with their children for up to 6 months. Thereafter, a woman has to either go back to her perpetrator, or if we've been able to upskill her, we can help her find housing. But this special needs housing policy that has been in the works since 2013 still has not been finalized. So the women that are victims of GBV do not have access to the special needs housing that is there, that government should be providing them under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Women also are sole breadwinners of a lot of these families, and they do not have the formal education to form part of our economic activities. So they form the majority of the informal trade in the country.
Are these women that are typically housed in the shelters?
Yes. And many of them do not have formal education. So for us to actually assist them in the job market becomes very difficult. So unless we have colleges that are willing to actually help with helping these women get matric certification, we cannot actually help them to get into formal employment. And they have to rely on baking, sewing, cooking, which does not actually earn them a substantial sustainable income for a family.
Give us a call, 086 000 2032. 086 000 2032. I'd love for you to be a part of this conversation as you're listening to it now. Sihle, it seems to me intuitive, and I guess the argument is intuitive, that if a woman is economically empowered, she'll walk away from her abusive husband, because then she can make do on her own. She'll take care of the kids. She has a job. She can get her own home. That seems all intuitive. But oftentimes, even women who are economically empowered remain in cycles of abuse and in abusive relationships. I'm assuming it's for the confluence of factors you spoke to earlier. A woman must begazela. Abantu bazontini. And all of these insidious principles that we instill in our psychosocial makeup. And it's about undoing that part, because even if you're a well-off woman with gainful employment, you are as vulnerable, or perhaps not as vulnerable, but you remain vulnerable as women who don't have that. And even, I'm thinking, for instance, of the story of Josina Michelle, for instance. She's the daughter of a president, experienced gender-based violence, and even with all the political capital she had, the police mishandled her, the healthcare system mishandled her files mysteriously went missing. And, even at a high, powerful level, women remain vulnerable. Again, so I have to circle then back to that question. How do we undo those principles? It seems intuitive. Teach your children better. Teach specifically your boy children better.
We need to be deliberate. I'm a single mom raising a boy child and a girl child. And I always challenge women and men to say we need to be the generation that is deliberate in the way we are upbringing our children. There is no way that I think it's okay the way I was brought up, where I grew up watching my dad being physical to my mom, or I grew up being in a toxic home where the only language of love is finances. We all have a story to tell about how we grew up in. We need to be deliberate enough when we raise our kids to say that is wrong, that should not happen, that should not go on, because you'd be surprised that most women who are economically empowered, who are self-independently sufficient, who are married to the greatest of people you may think of, who live in high-walled fences, some of them are subjected to this GBVF more than women who are not actually economically empowered. And why do I say this? Because most of them will never leave, because they are living under the umbrella of what will people say. If I walk away from my $1 million mansion, if I leave my powerful husband, or if I speak out that this powerful man is beating me up, or this is what's happening, what will people say? So they're living in their own prisons of their own mind, prisons of what the next person will say, because they are trying to protect a lifestyle which they need to impress people outside with, but behind the closed doors, it is hell. I always say to people, at night, if we could go and open people's roofs and just see what happens in people's houses, you'll find that those that are living in RDP homes are more happier than those that are living in your high wall fences. You find there's more peace there. You might find that. But when we speak to GBVF, it all goes back down to unlearning. Our mothers must be able and willing to learn that when I say I am tired of this husband, or if the husband says I am tired of this woman, the abuse is too much, I'm coming back home, they must allow to accept us back. Because our culture taught us that when you get married, they give you a kist, like a box, that they say it's a symbol to say you will come back home in a coffin, you will stay there no matter what, you must begazela. And our parents must unlearn that notion. They must learn now that even if my daughter's married to the president or whoever it is, if she says it is hot, the pot is boiling, I want to come home, our parents must love us enough to take us back. That's the first step for us unlearning as a society.
Give us a call, 086 000 2032. Let's go to the line. Silo and Mokopane, good evening.
Evening, Oliver, and your guest. Oliver, I hear more talks about, let me say this. I've got a problem when we talk about this gender violence, and then we hear more voices and more voices of on the side of the women who have been abused, which is the fact, right? Then I accept. But when it is done by men, it is the voice is not that loud, the same as when women have been abused and so forth or raped. And when we talk this as a man, as men, and then we'll be going to be labeled as we've been insensitive and so forth. I think as a media people and all that, we need to change how we discuss this topic. Because if we're going to deal with numbers, Oliver, that it is more women who are being abused and less men who have been abused, that's the problem for me. And not so long ago, I think 2-3 weeks back, there was a caller on this, not the show, on in the morning. The presenter did not believe that a woman can kill someone, and then the caller was saying, "Wait a minute, let me explain to you. My 2 brothers been murdered by their wives," and then Stephen was so shocked about it. And then now, when we
sorry,
Silo,
can I pause you because I'm starting to understand part of your point.
My point.
Hold on. Can I tell you what I think your point is, and then tell me if I'm right? Your point is that too many voices speak in defense of women who are vulnerable, but not enough voices speak against men who experience gender-based, who experience violence from their partners as well. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's exactly.
So can I ask you then a question?
No worries.
And men experiencing violence is equally as insidious as women experiencing violence. Violence categorically is wrong. But socially and structurally, the violence visited upon women take a different shape in terms of how we deal with it, treat it, and think about it versus violence that men experience. My question is, and I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it, but my question is, and I'm glad you called and raised this, because my question is, why did you choose today to raise this? Men often wait until women have conversations about what they're experiencing before they say, hold up, even me. I'm like, but why couldn't you raise it any other time? Because it seems like oftentimes that's used to detract away from women explaining their experience to say, even me, I'm equally as vulnerable, when systematically that may not be the case. Why don't men create their own platforms and their own opportunities to have these conversations? Ample time for it exists.
Oliver, you can go to the archives of the SABC radio and the SABC, SAfm. You'll hear me talking about this. And then I talk about this exactly topic, and then on another particular station, and the presenter was emotional about it, and he dropped my call. And then it's fine. I don't have a problem.
No. So my question is, I'm not saying you don't talk about it.
Yes,
hold on.
Yes,
I'm not saying that you don't talk about it. My question simply is, why is this the moment you choose to want to talk about it?
Because I hear that there's only more voice that I hear about women. Just for heaven's sake, there was a false rape about Tall as Mo, not so long. It's been vindicated. The lady lied. He destroyed someone's life. Nothing is happening about that lady. And then I can give you another example. So, Oliver, we need to balance this issue, as sensitive it is, that we cannot allow some women who lie about rape, who lie about all sorts of things, and then they can destroy someone's life and career and people and their lives.
Cool. Thank you, Silo. We're gonna have to leave it there. Really do appreciate your call.
That's what I was talking about. Now
No. We've been speaking for a while, my man. You're not the only person calling in, so you're not gonna have unlimited time. Thanks for your call. Really appreciate it. Miriam, the last time I checked, false rape accusations, when there was actual data on it, wasn't like less than 2% of all rape accusations altogether. So it's the vast majority of rape accusations are not false rape accusations. But you hear it as a red herring all the time. Do you maybe want to reflect on that engagement?
Yeah. So Your caller has depicted exactly what you are raising. It's 1.8%, and that was back in 2018, and it was a global figure of all reported rape that has been misrepresented. However, we also need to take into account that rape and sexual violence is a very emotional and traumatic experience for women. So when they're sitting in a court, they might not be able to be as concise as somebody that's talking about a white-collar crime.
Sure.
And so the charges get dropped because there's not enough evidence. It doesn't mean the woman was lying. You mentioned President Zuma and Kwesi. He was not acquitted. There just was not enough evidence. It doesn't mean that the court found that she lied. It means that there was not enough evidence. And that is what has happened. People have taken the 1.8% that has been proven to be false and are holding that over the heads of women that are victims and cannot actually bring proof to their perpetrators in a courtroom. And they are vilifying them under false pretenses. It is untrue that the majority of women lie about this. And also, if we look at the stats about men being victims of GBV, gender-based violence is not about women. It's about anybody that is inflicted by violence based on their gender. So a man can be a victim. However, again, we're talking about a proportion of 2% of reported cases that affect men. There are organizations out there that represent men. There are men's parliaments that represent men. There are forums for men. However, since 98% of the victims of gender-based violence are women, you will have people that have chosen to amplify this message. We are those organizations. Like you said, there are forums for these where men can actually raise it. But it comes down to actually unlearning and behavioral change. Because when men do report these things to the police, they are laughed at. If they try to raise it in their communities, they are ridiculed. So we do need to change the narrative that if a man is being abused, he is a victim and he needs to be afforded the same services that we would afford a woman. But just because we are focusing on women as the majority and our focus doesn't mean we're ignoring men. We are leaving those platforms to the platforms that are available to them.
Yeah. You know, oftentimes, gender-based violence activists are saying, what we're actually really trying to do here is dismantle the patriarchy. And by and large, just not just men, people don't realize that patriarchy is a double-edged sword. The same principles, tools, and culture that you instilled that make it difficult for women to report abuse because what will people say is exactly the same reason men won't do it, out of the same system of patriarchy. That if you undo violence for one, you're undoing violence for all, really. Is that a point that do we speak about, perhaps should we pause the conversation altogether and not speak about gender-based violence and just speak about how do we undo violence?
Yeah, I mean, how do we undo violence? It's so true. Men are also brought up in the sense where men don't cry. So you grow up in a society where men don't cry. So how do they manifest their anger? They manifest it through physical abuse. That's when they will start. It's either they beat each other up or they beat the woman up. So as a young boy growing up, you witness that, and it's something that you grew up doing. Men don't cry. They're not supposed to see you cry. I mean, so even as much as women cannot, when they want to go talk about their issues, people don't believe them. And because they're afraid of what people will say, they keep quiet. It also is a double-edged sword, like you're saying. Men also will say, I'd rather not report it because they say men don't cry. And if
they're going to laugh at me.
Yeah, and if I do cry, they're going to laugh at me. So let me be the man that just stomachs all of this and keep it within myself. But there are organizations that focus mainly on men. I beg to differ with our previous caller. We do, if he was listening carefully, when I was speaking, I kept on saying gender-based violence affects him it affects her. It's not only the man that is a perpetrator. Women also can be perpetrators of gender-based violence. But remember, it's more amplified because now we've got the femicide issue that's brought in the picture. Because we've seen a rise where women are killed on a daily by men, women, and children. And we are not turning a blind eye to the fact that men also do get affected and do become victims of gender-based violence. That is why I will never stop saying it comes to unlearning certain things. Teach your boy child that it's okay to cry. Teach your boy child that it's okay for you to be in touch with your emotions. If you're not happy about something, if something makes you sad, embrace those emotions, go through those emotions until you are okay. Do not box your boy children up and say, man, don't cry, you need to be strong. What will people say? Because these are seeds that you are planting, and when they are older, these seeds will germinate and become a monster. And once it's a monster, we turn around and say, what happened to this child? Why is this man a perpetrator? No, it started from home. It's a teaching from within the home. That is why even our girl child, we teach them from home. Speak truth. Speak. Don't be afraid to say there's an uncle that is doing 1, 2, 3 to me. My brother is doing 1, 2, 3 to me. Don't be afraid of the title. If somebody is touching you or doing something to you that you're uncomfortable with, forget the title of who he is, meaning it could be your brother, it could be your father, it could be your aunt, it could be your auntie, it could be your mother. Put the title aside, report, speak out. And again, you, the parents, unlearn the issue of not believing your children within the household. Learn to believe your children at the level of their grief. Learn to walk the journey with them, because trust me, sometimes they come to us and tell us something, we turn a blind eye, where we could have nipped it in the bud before it exploded and become something bigger than what it is.
Give us that call, 086 000 2032. Miriam, earlier on you spoke when we had the conversation about what do we then do to create more support, a more supportive environment for vulnerable women. You spoke about how there's limited resources, limited funding. I almost want to ask why, but the answer stares me right in the face, right? Maybe then let me ask this. How do we change that? When COVID started, government found money out of nowhere.
Under the rocks.
Right? But they could only muster up 2 million rand to 2 billion measly over a long period of time to support gender-based violence. They couldn't give it a COVID-like response, given that it is as grave, if not graver, a problem as COVID was at its peak. Clearly that points to a deficit in political will. How do we change that?
So first, I think education around gender-based violence, around femicide, and what it is very important. Bodily autonomy with children is essential. We need to start teaching children, and we need to start changing the way we parent and the way we think. The other thing is, back in 2018, the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation released a research study that said only 9% of households in South Africa actually knew about the availability of shelters for gender-based violence.
But I want to pause you there and maybe ask about the shelter culture of the country.
Yes.
You know, because I think we need to start maybe speaking about the culture around shelter, and before we speak about why they're inaccessible and why people don't know about them. But before we do, let's take a quick break. On the other side of this, we continue the conversation.
Hi, my name is Khomotso Kechi Mweketsi, your host for
You make my life so rich. You know you could have been some money.
Hi, my name is Khomotso Kechi Mweketsi, your host for Seasons, every Saturday and Sunday between 10 and 1.
Well, you could have been anything,
You will hear me playing this.
Hello, morning. Sunday, last time, Sunday.
And if you love smooth jazz or all kinds of jazzy sounds, you can hear me do this. Seasons every Saturday and Sunday between 10 and 1.
This week, today with Oliver Dickson.
You are still listening to This Week Today. My name is Oliver Dickson. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the conversation. Give us a call, 086 000 2032. Miles has been struggling to connect to us. That's what happens when the country's in load shedding and telephone lines are down. As a result of that, internet connectivity is few and far between. But we do have Miles with us. Miles, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you making the time to come on. What are your reflections around how we deal and treat gender-based violence judicially, but also perhaps just socially? When we started the conversation, I spoke about how the conversation around the vulnerability is not what we have enough. We speak about the police must do this and that, and all of that is important because they must get better. But we seldomly speak about the vulnerability of victims, and we seldomly speak about perpetrators and what to do with them that signals true and real justice.
Thank you, Oliver, for having me. I've heard this so many times, you need not a 16-day, you need 365 days plus one activism. You need 12 months plus one. You need 7 days plus one. You need 24 hours plus one. And what you need to do here, you need to first have a country that is politically stable. Like if you do business, if you want to make sure investors come in a country, you will have to stabilize the political hemisphere. And then people will tell you, no, I'm not a politician, I'm a businessman. That's rubbish. The businessmen are the biggest politicians. And then you need a loyal leadership so that you have a loyal political leadership. Then you will have a loyal society. A loyal society will have a loyal family, and a loyal family will have loyal people. That's what you need, and we have missed it for the past 28 years. I've heard the actors, the activism and the actors. They speak English. They are intellectuals and academics, and that is where it ends. You need your boots on the ground. You need to take it to the government, to the private sector. You need to take it to the international community that, look, activism or violence against women and children is something that must be an everyday thing. It must be well funded. But the problem is government cannot fund all these organizations because they pop out everywhere and they look.
Well, they pop out because the problem doesn't pop away, right? And so, for as long as the problem is around, organizations will keep popping up. But thanks for that sentiment. I want to, Miriam, I want to ask you this because before we went to the break, I spoke briefly about the political will and how we changed that, and you spoke about just like how people don't know about shelters, for instance, and that there aren't enough shelters. I want to ask you this: why is support for gender-based violence victims and mitigating the problem not a voting issue? People vote on potholes, people vote on corruption, people vote on ESCOM, people vote on the economy, but the ballot question is never, are there enough shelters for gender-based violence victims? How has the government fared on gender-based violence treatment? It's never a contestable issue between political parties, for instance. It's never a voting issue when people go to the ballots. We accept it to be an issue, but we never make it contentious enough that political actors think, I will lose power if I do not take this problem serious.
It comes down to an education problem and also stigma. We stigmatize women that look for help. And we also create the culture of self-stigmatization that we are victims and we do not want to be seen that way. And that is the biggest problem when it comes to women accessing the services. However, when we talk about political will, in 2015, there was a GBV council. Jacob Zuma dissolved it. We are now fighting for it to be legislated, so that when there is a change in government, it can never happen again. However, we are getting pushback from National Treasury because in the proposed legislation, we call for a gender-based violence and femicide fund. And it's not something that has ever been costed. And because of that, even the minister that came to the second gender-based violence summit, a summit whose theme was accountability, could not stand in front of the 1,600 delegates that were there and give us a figure. He gave us an estimated figure of 21 billion to be spent over 3 years. How is it going to be spent? Where is it going to be spent? Is it going to be ring-fenced? None of that could be answered because government does not take this issue seriously, because women and children's plight in this country has never been taken seriously. If we look at the war in Ukraine, in the first 3 months that the Russian tanks were on Ukrainian soil, 4,000 people died. In the exact same period, 6,000 people died in South Africa. Of them, 20% were victims of femicide. Why does government not take this seriously? Because women only form 10% of the economy. We do not have the money. We do not control what is important to government, the money. And that is why we are being left behind.
Yeah. Not that I'm shifting the obligation to fight gender-based violence to women, Sihle, but maybe as a final thought, it seemed to me that while women do pop up in these organizations, keep popping up, these shutdowns happened. 2018 there was one, 2019 there was one. And I remember when women marched to the JSE, for instance, and saying the private sector is not doing enough, they're not putting enough skin in the game. Women form only 10% of the economy, as Miriam just told us, but women form by and large the majority of the voting bloc. How perhaps, and I can't speak to this, right, but I can ask you this, how do women use that as a bargaining tool to say, take us serious?
It all boils down again to the education. Look, some women still, it's easy for you to give me an envelope to keep quiet and turn a blind eye. It's easy for you to promise me the latest car, the latest house, for me to turn around and turn a blind eye. It's easy for you to basically sell water to an Eskimo to me for me to turn a blind eye. Because as women, we fail to realize and acknowledge the power that we have. You know, if women could unify together, if women could accept that they are power personified together and do things together collectively, so without one woman turning around and saying, that one's lying, no, you are lying, no, we need to protect this man because of his position. Trust me, most of these issues that we are faced with would not be happening if women would come together. When one woman says, this is what happened to me, if women would learn to applaud each other, when a woman says, I am getting divorced, I am walking away from this man because he's been beating me up, abusing me all these years. Yes, I live behind a high-gated, wall-fenced house. And yes, I drive the latest Porsches, but I'm walking away. If women would learn to applaud and have applaud ceremonies for such women, trust me, it would make sure that women's voices are more amplified. Instead, we are living in a society where when a woman speaks out and says, I am being abused, I need to walk away, it's the very women who become the judges of the woman that is living under this hell in their own world. So if women need to acknowledge the power we have, trust me, even when it comes to voting, women would be able to vote back that GBVF council that was suspended in 2015 or dissolved in 2015, would be able to vote it back and say, we want it back because change is now and change must happen. So women need to change their mentality, get re-educated and learn the rot, because it is women that at the end of the day inflict pain deliberately so on other women.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Miriam, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Sihle, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to you for listening and being a part of this conversation. That brings us to the end of the show. It's 7:01. Time for your news with Greg House.
Independent and impartial. This is SAfm News.
Thank you, Oliver. In this news update, Phala issues set for ANC's national conference and a call for whistleblowers to be protected. Good evening. The ANC has deferred its discussion on the Phala Phala matter to its national conference next week. The governing party's electoral commission was expected to table its report on the theft at the president's farm at a special NEC meeting held at Nazareth, south of Johannesburg,